maybe it's a surgery, and you're self-administering your MSA funds. How are you going to know if that's a legitimate price or if you're being overcharged? If you go into a provider and say, hey, I don't have insurance, the bill needs to come to me. What rate are you going to get? What are they going to give you, right?
Medicare is set-aside money. It's there to protect your Medicare entitlement and forestall costly copays associated with your injury. But once it's gone, it's gone. In this episode of Medivest, the podcast, Craig and I discuss the many perils of MSA self-administration, including some consequences for getting it wrong.
So, Craig, what were you doing before you got into MSP?
Directly before?
I mean, generally before.
Finance.
You were in finance?
Working in finance, yeah. I set up the back office trades for the stockbrokers at a large bank.
Okay. I was building emergency vehicles.
That sounds a lot more fun than what I was doing.
I mean, it was fun. It was nothing like this.
No.
The reason I bring this up is I would ask you about how long it took you to actually figure out what MSP was.
How long?
Yeah, like how long did it take from doing what you were doing to getting into MSP that you felt like you had a good grasp of it and understood it?
When I got here.
It
took a long time. Yeah, well, I shouldn't say when I got here, but I was almost 2 years doing this before I came here, and it was more of a machine that was rolling that I had to keep feeding, and then I would pick up pieces as I went along. Right. I definitely didn't get the training from scratch with it. It was go do it. Just go do it and you'll figure it out. Right. And then as I went along, I learned a lot more about it. And then when I got here, I learned a whole lot more about all the different areas of it. So
yeah, I had someone sit down with me and give me kind of a crash course and then a little bit more detailed over time type of thing. Yeah. And of course, you and I have been in this industry long enough that there was not, when we started, there was no work comp reference guide. There was no formalized guidance like that whatsoever. There was like some memos.
I have a 130 question test that I give to new employees, and we go over it.
Oh my gosh.
And then it lets me know what they know and what they don't know.
Right.
And then we go back based on that test, and then we hit the weak points, and then I give them the test again.
Yeah, I bring this up because, and as I've discussed this with you on a prior podcast episode, but it is exceedingly rare to onboard, to welcome a new beneficiary as a member to Medivest for professional administration and them have any understanding of what exactly that money is used for or how any of this works.
Yeah. They're confused.
Especially after well, I would say not especially, even after having signed on the dotted line copious amounts of documentation.
Yes.
Even after signing a professional administration agreement, even after that is done.
Yeah.
Even if we've presented the information to them and gone through it with them and helped them understand what it's about, and then we actually get down to the nitty-gritty of, okay, now you've got medical bills, we have your MSA funds, let's work this out, let's get these providers paid.
Right.
Even at that point, it's a struggle. It's a couple months before it really starts to click, and that seems completely reasonable when you consider how convoluted some of this is, and the understanding or the idea that you would actually have cash pay ahead of an insurance benefit.
Yeah.
Because in my experience, the insurance benefit pays, and then the provider comes
and then
to me
I get
for
the
cash.
bill.
Right. Then they come to me for cash. They typically come to me for more cash.
Yeah. Right.
Like I had a surgery 2 years ago, and I was quoted an amount, which is, I think, the law. They have to give you an idea of what it's going to cost. And then practitioners come out of the woodwork associated with my surgery that I wasn't even, I thought I
Right.
paid you already. Oh, I didn't pay you. But the idea of actually forking up cash ahead, almost like it's an out-of-pocket expense or deductible on the insurance.
Yeah.
But all this is the long way of getting to the point that generally a beneficiary of an MSA is confused about it.
Yeah.
So where do you typically start
When
on
it
that?
comes to that.
Yeah.
So
By the way, I would ask you the question because you're in sales. Are you even having that conversation at that stage? Obviously, our member services team is doing a welcome call and explaining, this is what your MSA is about, blah 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 blah. But
so I like to jump out in front of it. So the minute I get involved in the case, I not only talk about the Medicare set aside, what it is and why it's important. What I'll do is, if I'm talking directly with the attorney or I'm talking with the individual, I will talk about administration. If we're just in the infancy, if we're doing the MSA at that point, and they want to have a call or they want to discuss some stuff, or maybe the attorney's having a hard time conveying this to why it's important to the client, I'll jump on a call. We'll go through that process. We'll talk about what the MSA is, why it's important, and then I will talk about, okay, once you get down to this number, there's two options for what happens. And that's really where I pick up that part of the conversation when it comes to administration. Either the MSA funds can be professionally administered. That's where a company is hired to handle the MSA funds per Medicare's guidelines, or it can be self-administered, and that's where you as the individual will administer these funds. And it's important that you follow the guidelines that Medicare has issued with these funds to protect your benefits. So there's a list of things you can and can't do with this money, and there's a list of guidelines as far as what you have to provide to them in terms of documentation, how you can spend it. That's really where I start, and I tell them the vast majority of people, even if they make a good faith effort to administer their own funds, typically mess it up in the first 5 years. And that's going to be somebody who is buying a boat or a house or a car with their MSA funds. It's also somebody who's overpaying for a procedure or overpaying for medications. You're just as out of compliance, and Medicare wants those funds to be handled by certain rules. And if you're not in compliance with those rules, even if it's a good faith effort, Medicare says you need to put the funds back and spend them appropriately. So that's really where I will start. A lot of injured workers or injured parties are confused. First off, what is this MSA? Why do I have to do it? We'll go through that. Then I'll talk about what happens to the money. That's the next natural step in the process. So we get into that. I tell them what happens with the funds, and I tell them the pros and cons of it.
I feel like that's life's question.
Yeah.
What happens to the
money?
money?
What happens with the money?
That's life's question. And I have children. So I'm learning that. I think
I always laugh. It makes me think about one of those cartoon episode where somebody puts money in the bank and and it's gone. It's like, what do you mean it's gone? Oh, it's gone. It's all gone. I have kids too, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of common mistakes.
Yeah.
I think number one mistake is commingling.
Yeah.
So number one mistake is you get your MSA funds and you just deposit that money into your checking account, or it's lumped in with all of the other settlement proceeds that you got. Right off the bat, that money disappears into a blob of other cash.
Yep.
And
pretty hard to account for it when it's mixed with everything else.
Separate accounting is not happening now, and you're just using it it's part of the general fund. It's
one of the first things. It needs to be set up in a separate interest-bearing account. That's it. You're not supposed to commingle it with other funds.
It's hard to get the interest-bearing part wrong. If you're putting it in a bank account, you're probably earning some interest on it of some sort. I don't know.
Is there a negative interest account anywhere? I don't know. They don't advertise that.
They can't exist. But interest bearing. I can tell you that when I received a statement from my bank to file my taxes, the amount of money and interest that I was keying into my statement, I don't know that it was. I think it was more than in the sense, but it
I was about to say,
wasn't.
was it more than the cost of the paper?
It wasn't much, I can tell you that. But
Right,
okay,
right.
so interest-bearing account,
Yeah.
separate interest-bearing
interest-bearing
account. What do you consider a mistake number 2? I got a whole list of them in my back.
Oh
pocket.
yeah. Only for Medicare covered case related items. Probably one of the most difficult things in there. Setting up an interest bearing account, people make that mistake, they commingle it. Now, if I were to go to the average person and say, "Hey, is this item covered by Medicare?" They're going to look at me like, "I don't know." If you're administering those funds on your own, you're going to have to figure that out. That's one of the biggest areas that I think is one of the most complex areas. Is it case related and Medicare covered? What if you have a questionable item? What if somebody has an elbow injury, and as a result of that elbow injury, they start having range of motion issues, in their wrist or somewhere else? Can you use those MSA funds? Is it related to the original injury or not? And if it is, if I think it is, or I have documentation to prove that it is it Medicare covered? The layers of complexity just keep showing up with it. If you have somebody who has a condition and it's led to something that was never even addressed in an MSA, but you can draw it back to that original injury, can you pay for it? Who's making that call? Most people aren't even going to know if it's Medicare covered.
Right. Another way that mistake can be made is I'm seeing my primary care physician.
Yeah.
And my primary care physician is currently prescribing me medications for various sundry things. Pain medication to treat my injury.
Yeah.
But what about my hypertension medication? Or he's seeing me for, I'm trying to think of a good example of not a medication. Perhaps I'm having a procedure.
Common cold.
Perhaps he's treating me for that, right? And I received the bill and I paid for the entire bill. And did I
Out
pay
of compliance?
Now you're more than welcome to use other money,
Yeah,
other cash to pay for that, right? But when it comes to your MSA, maybe you're paying for items maybe you're doing your best and you're paying for a bill for what you think is just treatment for your injury, but maybe it's treatment for something else.
right.
Maybe there's a comorbid in there that is you're being billed for, and you're paying for that altogether. So you're taking your MSA funds and you're using it on things that are not case related or not injury related. That's an easy way for that to.
Yeah, to me that's one of the most complex things, and a lump right behind that. What are you paying for those procedures? What kind of case is it? Medicare. The question I always get is like, when we're looking at MSAs is what rate is used here? If you're talking a work comp case, it's based on state fee schedule. If you're looking at a liability case, it's going to be based off of usual and customary, based on the zip code where the accident happened. That's typically what you're going to see, right? And the first question that comes up is like, well, what's the Medicare rate? Why is this not, why is it not billed at Medicare rate, right? And I always tell people, most of the time, Medicare is the only one that pays Medicare rates. But these MSAs are at a set level. So if you were to take a work comp MSA and you had a state fee schedule price for a surgery and you paid usual and customary for it, guess who's out of compliance because they overpaid for that item or procedure. So not only do you have to figure out if it's a Medicare covered and case related item, you have to make sure you're not overpaying, right? So that's a whole nother thing. How does the average person figure that out?
Well, when I think about compliance, I don't know that overpayment is a compliance issue. It is certainly a premature exhaustion issue.
Yeah.
But there's any number of ways that you can find yourself in trouble there. Have you ever negotiated rates with your provider prior to receiving services yourself?
There's a story I always tell about that. And
you get asked that question a lot, such that story always has to come up. Like,
yeah.
Proceed.
This is what I bring up when I'm talking with the individual, and they, I say, have you ever, negotiated with a provider? Have you, on a surgery or something else, have you gone in and had those discussions? Most people have not. Most people will run a bill through insurance. They'll see what insurance pays, and then they're responsible, if there's copays or deductibles or anything like that, they pay it, right? Now imagine going in for a procedure, and maybe it's a surgery, and you're self-administering your MSA funds. How are you going to know if that's a legitimate price or if you're being overcharged? If you go into a provider and say, hey, I don't have insurance, the bill needs to come to me. What rate are you going to get? What are they going to give you, right? Some providers are going to give you the maximum that they're allowed to give you by law, knowing that they probably have to negotiate a little bit, right? So what's the right amount for that? The average person is not really going to know.
Well, you're a cash payer.
Yeah,
you're an MSA that's cash, so you're a cash payer. So,
right, and again, I'd use the instance of somebody scheduling a surgery or something. If we're administering it, we want to have that conversation with them. Versus them just agreeing to a surgery at whatever price a provider is going to put out there. So, figuring out the right price to pay on a lot of this stuff is difficult, and that's right behind, is it Medicare covered? Is it not? And that's right behind, set it up in an interest-bearing account and don't commingle your funds. You can start to see there's all these areas where you could potentially misappropriate funds, spend the wrong amount, spend it on the wrong item. Those are all things, and ultimately at the end of the day, that injured party is going to be the one who will suffer from that if the funds aren't spent correctly or those steps aren't followed. So there's a lot of confusion that goes into this.
Another point of confusion that I frequently hear is that if the MSA funds exhaust, that is okay because Medicare will then pay for everything. And what's frequently forgotten there, or not factored into the calculations, is the fact that Medicare typically only pays up to around 80%.
Copays and deductibles.
So you have copays and deductibles that you're having to pay.
Yeah.
So premature MSA exhaustion just means more money out of the beneficiaries' pockets.
Right. And, with administration too, an administrator is going to stretch those funds out. We're going to negotiate on that individual's behalf wherever we can. So we're going to try and stretch those funds out for that individual, which means we are pushing back the time if those funds exhaust, before that individual passes away, and they still need treatment. We are pushing that further out so that individual is not getting into copays and deductibles, right? What is it? It's typically what, 80-20? Isn't it typically 80-20? So
usually up to 80, sometimes not quite 80.
Medicare Advantage plans can, change that if you're on an Advantage plan. But yeah, for somebody who's on standard Medicare, you're looking at 80-20 split, and that could be pretty significant, So all the more reason to stretch those funds out. Negotiate as much as you can.
Stretch them funds.
Stretch the funds, man. I always say that. Stretch the funds. That's the benefit of administration too. Stretching the funds out. Need help with lien resolution, Medicare set-aside allocations, or professional administration? Medivest has you covered. We're here to guide you every step of the way. Visit medivest.com or call 877-725-2467 today.
Another common mistake, particularly when a MSA is funded with a structure.
Yeah.
So let's say you have a premature exhaustion, or you have an exhaustion within a year.
Yeah.
Say it exhausts in October, and you incur expenses in November and December, and then let's say that, for the sake of the example, the MSA will fund again in January. Sometimes taking those January funds and using it to pay November and December's bills, as opposed to coordinating with Medicare to be primary. And you think about a little bit of the technical aspect of that is if you exhaust your money prematurely and you want Medicare to pay primary, if you have exhausted that money appropriately, you can demonstrate that to CMS, and they will assume primary payer responsibility. Let them know when it is
that you're going to have copays and deductibles
then
for that period of time.
You're going to have copays and deductibles, right? But then you're not starting from behind.
Right.
Because if you're paying November and December's expenses with January's money, what do you think is
Then
going
you're
to happen?
probably going to exhaust again.
What's going to happen in probably October or September, right? And you're going to get behind. That's sometimes a mistake there in not actually getting Medicare involved to pay during a temporary exhaustion.
Which has always led to the question in my mind of surgeries, major big ticket items. The seed money that's put into account is typically the first 2 years of anticipated treatment and the first of all major surgeries, right? But if you have somebody who doesn't have a lot of surgeries in there, you may have a smaller seed amount. So the question is, on those kinds of cases, I'd be interested to see, do those typically prematurely exhaust, or not prematurely, but temporarily exhaust with more frequency than ones that have a lot of surgeries in them.
Well, that's the advantage of a structure.
Yeah.
We're not really talking structures on this episode much, but the advantage of a structure is if you've got $150 left in your MSA,
yeah,
and it funds again in January, and you have a surgery in this given year, you're out $100. Your MSA is out $100. Right. The surgery is going to go to Medicare to cover, and they'll pay it for that date of service, and then your MSA funds again in January.
Yeah.
That January money is not going to pay for that.
Right.
That surgery. So that's an advantage there too.
Yeah.
To structure, but.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that seed calculation and how much it can impact an MSA depending on surgeries versus no surgeries. I would say I don't see a lot of cases where there's not a decent amount of seed money put into a case. But every once in a while on smaller MSAs, but again, there's always that realm where when you get into structures, does it make sense to do a structure or not? If you get below a certain level, I think it's a small case assignment fee. And it's really difficult to save money. So, but sorry, I took us into structures, but
I think that was my fault.
Now you blame it on me. I'll own that one. But yeah, it's you see the complexities of administering MSA funds, and I think a lot of people don't look at the big picture and look at all these different things that can present problems in a post-settlement environment.
I just think it's challenging because, and you can understand why a beneficiary would be confused when you realize that in the healthcare market, providers are typically confused about MSAs as well.
Yeah.
They if you tell a provider that you have a Medicare set aside, typically what we hear is the provider thinks you're talking about a MAP plan.
Yeah. An insurance
plan.
MA plan.
I guess you have to call it a MA plan.
MA.
Because
Medicare Advantage.
A MAP plan is
Medicare Advantage plan.
The P is plan, so you're just saying, if you say
Can we
MAP
make
plan,
that a
you're
thing?
saying it a plan.
Next time you're publicly speaking, work that in and see if it catches on.
We kind of are.
Mama.
But the provider doesn't understand the way the Medicare set aside works.
Right.
That is an advantage of having a professional. I swear I'm not just sitting here trying to sell professional administration in this discussion. But one thing that we do get into is communication with providers about the way the MSA works and what they can expect and what payment looks like and what rates look like, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's not something that if you've never had that conversation with your provider about, you may struggle to communicate.
As an individual, I don't think I could. That would be extremely difficult to carry that conversation with a provider if you were doing this on your own. Here's what this is. Here's how it works. You're almost having to become an expert in that area just to explain it to somebody else.
Well, and it's a confusing thing, and so some expertise does.
Is it?
Right? I mean, it's a confusing thing, and so probably you get the hang of it once you talk to 2 or 3 providers, maybe.
Yeah.
But and asking for an itemized bill.
Yeah.
So that you can evaluate which items on that may be Medicare allowable or on the formulary.
Yeah, and establishing the hierarchy of who pays, if it's related or not related. Who's next in line? Where does that go? That's something that the individual is going to have to coordinate.
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. Coordinating your own benefits.
Yeah. Yeah, with your, throw it on the list.
If you're a Medicaid beneficiary.
Oh, yeah. If you're dual eligible individuals, where do you go first? Who pays? Who's responsible?
Yeah, we understand why they're confused.
Do we even want to talk? Yeah, it's the Gallardo case, right? Do we? I don't even think we want to go down that road, right? With Medicaid coming after future medical funds, like just a whole nother thing. I mean, if you throw in any other type of benefits like Medicare and Medicaid, I mean, there's a lot of coordination that's going to need to happen in there to make sure that everything's handled properly. And again, if you have somebody who's a dual eligible beneficiary, Medicare and Medicaid benefits, those MSA funds can impact the Medicaid benefits if the MSA funds are not handled in a proper way. So, there's a lot of potholes to potentially, hit along that road.
I think it's like trying to think of like some of the root causes of this. I think it really comes down to the fact that our healthcare system in the United States is really designed for providers to work with plans. Yeah. The assumption in the market is that you have insurance and that you're paying for things with insurance.
Right.
And that's the way that billing departments like to bill. They like terms. They use the jargon and the lingo. And when you walk in as a cash payer, it's a completely different. It's a completely different thing. The expectations are different. You pay up front. There's
a lot of confusion too.
What am I paying for?
Yeah. Well, do you have insurance? Yeah, I do, but this isn't part of that. Well, what do you have? Like I've seen that where even with a family member who was doing some self-pay stuff, discussions with the insurance company about I have the right to use my pay out of pocket. I don't have to run this through my insurance. And even confusion and discussion about that. It was pretty
like deciding not to use your insurance and pay out of pocket.
Right. There was discussions about whether, this family member was even allowed to do that. I mean, it's crazy to think, but it happens. You're right. People are so used to working within a system, working with insurance, working with all these other, these knowns. And you walk in there as a self-administering MSA individual, there's going to be some confusion on the other end of it too. And you, like I said, you're going to have to really be up to speed on it and be able to explain it, to some of those parties, to some of those, providers about how this works and what you can and can't do. And that's a lot to take on.
So we've talked about commingling or not commingling, separate interest-bearing accounts. We have not talked about keeping an accounting of your expenditures out of your MSA.
It's another item.
That's an expectation of, like the reference guide, for instance, mentions that you should keep full accounting.
Attestation letters?
They want the attestation. They don't want the full accounting.
Right.
They do want a full accounting if they say they do.
Yeah.
I don't know how often this gets submitted. They say that they want a full accounting if you are, what's the situation? If you are the beneficiary of an MSA, but you are not enrolled in Medicare at that time, and you later become enrolled in Medicare.
Yeah.
They say that they want you to submit a full accounting of your MSA from date of settlement to your enrollment. I don't know how often that's actually happening.
Yeah.
But, I mean, as an administrator, we actually provide a full accounting. Typically.
There's a lot of work that goes into it. I mean, you start adding all these things together and you start seeing all the places that you can make mistakes and have issues. And, I'm looking at this after, being in this industry for 20 years. That is not something I would want to take on, even knowing what I know right now. It's a lot, and that's why I say, when I talk about administration, I'm like, it really is for the individual. It's a quality of life thing, focus on getting better, getting treatment. These are all things that are going to frustrate you and stress you out and cause issues.
I'm going to go back to the beginning of the episode and probably close out with this, but I feel like it's like that curve of expertise where you start not knowing. I'm gonna completely botch this. Should have looked at this.
Go for it.
But let me see if I can get this right. You start out not knowing what you don't know, and then you go to knowing what you don't know, and then you go to knowing it. I'm overlapping two concepts because there's the concept of like you're able to teach it. Like there's a point at which you know so much you can't teach someone else, because your level of knowledge is so distant from what it was like when you didn't know that you actually can't impart that information to somebody. It's like, why don't you just know this? Why don't you just get this? I feel like it's a little bit like that. Like I did not, when I started at Medivest, I wasn't an MSP before I got, like I said, I built emergency vehicles. My degree was in communications electronics. I worked on radios, two-way systems.
I was getting yelled at by stockbrokers.
You're getting yelled at stockbrokers. And then by some, I have this conversation with people who are in MSP all the time. How did you get into this? You probably didn't get out of college and say, this sounds like an interesting industry. I want to get into this. You just usually you get into it by roundabout means, but then you're in it. I start out in this industry and I don't understand MSP, and then I gain a knowledge of it, and I get to the point where I know enough to administer my MSA. But now, having been in it 2 decades, I'm wise enough to know that I don't want to do it. Like I know enough about it that I don't actually want to ever have to do this.
Exactly.
Because it is so annoying.
There's a lot that goes into it.
We're going to call this episode MSP is annoying. It's just what we're going to
Good luck with that one.
I don't know what the algorithms will think of that, but if we care about algorithms at all. But
I think it, there's a lot of information. There's so much education that can still be done, in this industry. And that's, for me, that's the area that I really like to focus on is just getting the information out there so that people can make informed decisions. I've said this before. I said it earlier today. My job is not to tell you what to do. My job is to let you know what the options are, let you know what the risks are, and then you decide where you're comfortable. For me, I'm not comfortable handling my non-MSA funds. I'm going to have somebody else do it just because I know enough of, like you said, I know enough about what goes into it that I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Well, God bless those self-administering beneficiaries who really want to do it right. Who actually want to do it right. There are definitely those out there who do. I think the vast majority of folks who get an MSA, they're like, I got my cash. And I guess I just do with this whatever I do with it is my money. I think that's probably the vast majority of people, but there are those out there who get the MSA and they're like, I actually want to try and do this right. And
I've had someone who used to, was a medical biller. They were a medical biller and they had an accounting degree, and she was like, no, I'm going to read through the guidelines. I got a good feel for this. Like I understand it, and I'm going to have a go at it. Mm-hmm. And I said, no, I understand. And I said, look, if you run into any issues and you decide that's not the route you want to go, let me know. Right? There's going to be some people out there who have enough experience that can probably, do it. But the question is, out of all these things that are out there, do you know enough about all of them to make them all sync up together? Because that's really what you got to do to make it work right. So,
okay. Well, I think that's probably a great place for us to wrap up this particular episode.
All right.
Thanks. I actually had no clue that you were in finance before you got into MSP. But
I've been yelled at by a lot of stockbrokers because they don't have any time. They were like, I need this done. I need it done yesterday. So set this up now.
Got it. All right. Well, thanks, Greg.
Thank you.